So Trump has a bizarre reputation where half the country thinks he does this and the other half thinks he does that. So the right thinks that he's going to stand up to Xi and Putin, and the left says that he wants to be Xi and Putin. And it's just a really bizarre thing to watch. Hello, my friends. My name is Darren Gerdes. I'm just a professor trying to provide some context in the war in Ukraine. And I do three big stories as a segment each night. And these are the stories that are most likely to have a significant effect on Ukraine, or through what's going on in the world, have an effect on Ukraine. Okay, so let's start with this. So we know the minerals deal was just concluded. The New York Post wrote this, that the U.S. is stepping back from peace talks rolled to end the war between Russia and Ukraine. Wow. Okay. So now, are they really stepping back, or are they preparing the ground for it, or what? This is according to a State Department official. Trump's new minerals deal with Ukraine gives the U.S. preferential access to resources, but leaves Putin unmoved on peace. Despite stalled talks and rising bombings, Trump remains reluctant to pressure Russia directly. It's very weird watching why Trump won't push Putin. Like, he was supposed to, like, if you ask conservatives, or I should say, if you ask Republicans, which are largely progressives, like, no, he's gonna show Putin a thing or two. It's a good thing to make deals with Putin, they'll say, right? Conservatives will have a more hostile view, and the populists will have more of a, like, let's just get along, it's not our fight anyway. Okay, but it's hard to understand what he's actually doing. The U.S.-Ukraine mineral deal is a diplomatic win, but its true impact depends on how U.S. President Trump leverages it with Putin in peace talks. If he leverages it, like, that's the open question here. The agreement can help dismantle prevailing MAGA narrative that Ukraine is merely a Democratic Party cause. That kind of gives me hope, but at the same time, I don't see the actual movement. Instead, what I see is something like this. Maybe this Times Radio, maybe Trump is fed up with the position of Putin, who has been dragging his feet on negotiations. The U.S. negotiating team may have come to the same conclusion, that direct peace talks with Putin are a mistake. And if so, it looks like they're preparing the ground to walk away. For Russians, the latest deal between the U.S. and Ukraine is a heavy defeat, says Tander. Putin will increasingly feel the need to meet Trump. Maybe, unless he walks away. It's kind of weird. He said, first the Vatican, now this. They're extremely nervous. But are they? I mean, I'm not sure. Sir William Browder thinks he's walking away. U.S. pulls out of formal peace talks between Ukraine and Russia. I guess the war wasn't going to end in 24 hours, he says. Now, Greg Terry and I just had an argument about this. Well, not an argument, a debate about this. Like, Greg was saying, look, they're leaving. Here's why. And I'm saying, no. Hold on. Slow down. They're preparing the ground to leave. They're setting the table so that they can have this as an option. And you see that very clearly in videos like this. Vance finally admits Russia's war in Ukraine won't end soon. Trump's efforts to end the war by pressuring Ukraine to concede to Russia have so far proven futile. And he was on Fox News last night talking to Brett Baer about this. I watched this and I was like, huh? The war in Ukraine won't end anytime soon. Russia and Ukraine must make that decision. Well, that's a change in tone. And then he concluded with this. Listen to this. Listen to what he said at the very end.
We're done with this, but only Russia and Ukraine can make that decision. That's not something even President Trump can do for him.
Whoa. He said, we're done with this. Only Ukraine can do it. Let's listen again.
Thousands and thousands of young people. We're done with this, but only Russia and Ukraine can make that decision. That's not something even President Trump can do for him.
Yeah, so there seems to be some significant change in tone, and it's not the tone from the campaign. I'm going to arm Ukraine and give them everything to bring Putin to the table. He hasn't done anything like that. Okay, spokesperson of the U.S. Department of State, Tammy Bruce, said, we will not be the mediators. It is now between the two parties, and it is now the time to say that they need to present and develop concrete ideas about how this conflict is going to end, and it's going to be up to them. So we're hearing this from a number of different levels. Now, at the same time, F-16s are being sent to Ukraine from the United States. It's not full formed. It's like for spare parts. It's like not fully functional F-16s. The U.S. is sending decommissioned F-16s from Davis-Monthan Air Force Base to Ukraine to be used for spare parts. So they're loading this kind of thing up. But, that's a good step. And talking about this, F-16s. I held a meeting on the development of our military aircraft fleet. All the key issues were discussed, the F-16s that are already in Ukraine, F-16s we expect in the near future, and the systemic solutions that will help us prepare to and use our military aviation. Great. I'm glad that those F-16s are getting there, but that's not really like the solution here. Why? Because the United States has its focus elsewhere. It has its focus on China, not just economically dealing with like trade wars and things along those lines, but Russia and China are doing more joint military operations near Alaska. And the U.S. is considering how to respond. One option is to reopen Cold War era bases. Like, where are they doing this? In Alaska. Like, the U.S. keeps this like zone around Alaska of like, you know, these are our islands. This is Alaska. You shouldn't be over here, right? And the U.S. and China, this is not the first time that that Russia and China have been doing this. Now, China recently seized Vietnam's San Kay in the South China Sea. It's actually like squarely between Vietnam and the Philippines, and it's right near a Philippine island. But why is China down here seizing that? Well, yeah, Sandy Cay is just kilometers from the Philippines military outpost at Tisu Island, and this could become a problem. Like the Chinese are just acting quite militant recently. China's military might is growing, and it's relentlessly harassing Taiwan. The upheaval in global geopolitics may also permit China to test so-called dark gray zone tactics. So they just keep harassing Taiwan at every turn, doing military drills around the island, that sort of thing. And so the U.S. doctrine has shifted to paying attention to China. And so that's part of why not so much paying as much attention to Ukraine. So that could be part of what's going on. Now, Donald Trump is an interesting character. Like, okay, so Putin, you have a Victory Day parade. Okay, President Trump just renamed May 8th as Victory Day for World War II, and November 11th, that was Veterans Day, as Victory Day for World War I. Well, okay, but like, people, what about people from Vietnam? Like, Veterans Day acknowledged everyone from, you know, if you were a soldier at any time, Vietnam or Desert Storm or Iraq or Afghanistan or, okay. So he came out with this True Social post today. Many of our allies and friends are celebrating May 8th as Victory Day, but we did more than any other country by far in producing a victorious result on World War II. I know some people are scoffing at that. I'll address that in a moment. I'm hereby renaming May 8th as Victory Day for World War II and November 11th as Victory Day for World War I. We won both wars. Nobody was close to us in terms of strength, bravery, or military brilliance, but we never celebrate anything. That's because we don't have leaders anymore that know how to do so. We are going to start celebrating our victories again. Okay. I'm not sure about that commentary of we don't never celebrate anything, but let's look at it like this. Was the United States the country that did more for World War II in World War II than any other country by far? So I don't think so. I think in some ways, by some metrics, and I looked at some AI to say, like, let's process this, let's think through this. Well, the Soviets lost more soldiers than anyone in World War II. And there's a reason for that, because, well, you killed your top general. Stalin killed his top generals, and then they were okay with meat wave kind of assaults. So it was kind of a mix of, they did take it in the chin from the Germans, but they also at the same time had terrible tactics, and Stalin kind of didn't listen to his generals, the ones that survived. So there was part of that there. I think the British really should be commended for holding the line until the Americans were in the fight. And like, just holding out was a big thing. The Americans did something. They did a lot between Lend-Lease for both the British and, again, for the Soviets. Like, they did a lot for the Soviets, and for fighting in two theaters, both in Europe and in the Pacific, which was pretty much the American show, or mostly the American show on that side for the Allies. So they did a lot, but this is a little hyperbolic. It depends on how you define it. Okay, but at any rate, the whole point was he wants a May 8th Victory Day parade, kind of like the May 9th parade. Well, it's not even a parade yet, but he wants to have a parade soon. Like, he looks at that May 9th parade that Putin has, and is kind of like, yeah, we should do that. Now, this isn't the first time he talked about that. He was talking about that in his first administration. And now there are detailed plans for a potential military parade on President Trump's birthday, which happens to be the date of the U.S. Army's anniversary as well, just happily coincides with that. In June, for more than 6,600 soldiers and at least 150 vehicles, 50 helicopters, 7 bands, possibly a couple thousand civilians. The AP article also adds this. The planning documents obtained by the AP are dated April 29th and 30th, have not been publicly released. They represent the Army's recent blueprint for its long-planned 250th anniversary festival on a national mall, and a newly added element, a large military parade that Trump has long wanted but is still being discussed. Now, when I look at the Russian military parade, I don't see strength. I see weakness. What are you trying to prove? Right? I've been in the martial arts for years, and I find that when somebody doesn't really know what they're at, trying to pretend like they're a martial artist, like, ooh, right? A real martial artist, if you're approaching him to do harm, he's simply going to adjust in such a way that he's going to either kick your head off or use your force against you, depending on which martial art he's in. And it's going to be a very subtle thing. It's not going to be this big, great big, huge kind of display. And that's kind of what we're trying to accomplish here. What are you trying to prove? Well, the slides don't include any price estimates. It would likely cost tens of millions of dollars for what exactly? I mean, okay, so maybe it's a patriotic thing and we're just being too hard on them, but I'm uneasy with that. Democracies don't tend to need to do that. Okay. Gary Kasparov was commenting on this. The detailed Army plans for the military parade in Donald Trump's birthday call for more than 6,000 soldiers, as I just read. And he replied, perfect. And every Trump supporter attending the parade gets a free black shirt. That's a reference to the black shirts of fascism. There were black shirts in Mussolini. There were brown shirts with Hitler. So, okay. Yeah, you don't want to, it's kind of a bad look as well. All right. Now, this was really an interesting thought. Richard Hania posted this, talking about Fukuyama, who said this, quote, Trumpism is basically mentally drenched in what Nietzsche labeled resentment. It's not resentment, but it's spelled a little bit slightly. And that is the acute resentment of others based on wounded pride, perceived disregard, fears of inadequacy, and a desire to exact revenge on those who had earlier failed to pay adequate respect. Now, he's quoting Francis Fukuyama here. And I want to read the whole paragraph in context, because there's something to this, because Trump kind of makes sense in some ways, but he doesn't really fit any ideological category exactly right. So the quote comes from this. Ever since Trump's first term, I felt the phenomenon he represents could best be explained not in terms of ideas or ideology, nor could it be easily explained as a matter of economic interests, social groups, class, or other familiar concepts. And this is why I say he can zig or zag, because he doesn't really have this ideological center like an Obama or like a Bush might. It's not that such factors are irrelevant, but rather that they fail to capture the full phenomenon. The most useful framework, in my opinion, is psychology, both personal and social. Trumpism is basically a mentality drenched in what Nietzsche labeled resentment. Okay, that's not resentment. It's a little bit like, it's like resentment on steroids. That is acute resentment of others based on wounded pride, perceived disregard, fears of inadequacy, desire to exact revenge on those who had earlier failed to pay adequate respect. Let's just, for the sake of argument, if you're a MAGA Trump supporter type, let's just remove the fears of inadequacy from there. But you can go with me about this whole idea. Even on the right, you can go with me about that. So, like, there is kind of a wounded pride, like, they don't understand who he is, or perceived disregard or desire to exact revenge on those who have ditched him over time, right? I mean, there's that. So I think that that's a fairly explanatory understanding, and I wanted to bring this to the fore. Okay. Now, with that, part of Trump's inner circle is also It looks like Trump's chief political advisor, Stephen Miller, is emerging as the leading candidate for the role of national security advisor. That's not good, especially not for Ukraine. He's no friend of Ukraine. Mike Waltz was the most conventional guy in the cabinet, maybe fighting with Rubio for that position. But as much as he didn't, like, he really just tried to toe the Trumpian line. He's out to pasture now at the UN. And out to pasture is maybe too strong, but he's not inner circle anymore like he was before. And Miller is not going to be a good replacement. Meanwhile, Marco Rubio is simultaneously the Secretary of State, the Interim National Security Advisor, the Acting Administrator of USAID, and Acting Archivist of the United States. Like, he's wearing 4 hats. That's just bad management. But Gary Kasparov also made this comment, and I think it's useful to understand. There's a common fallacy that autocrats expand government to expand their power, like they're trying to take on more and more power. But usually it's the opposite. They contract the circle of decision making to their offices and their person into what's called a power vertical. Loyalists holding multiple positions is a standard symptom. And so that's like, yeah, that's how people that are, and it comes out of a fear that, like, we don't want this to get out of hand. We want to keep the loyalists in charge of things. And that's what's happening. Okay, I'll close with this. Darth Putin. I believe, this is Burgess Everett said, I believe Marco Rubio is now all these 4 things: Secretary of State, National Security Advisor, Acting USAID, and Acting Archivist of the U.S. And Darth Putin said it isn't immigrants taking all the jobs. It's Marco Rubio. That is pretty clever. I got to give it to you. All right. Thank you for your time. Thank you for the likes, the shares, the subscribes, and thank you for being the kind of person that cares about Ukraine.